we've got loads of comments so far. If you can see comments, Matt, on if you look at top, it should say comments, just in case you don't know.
Oh yeah, 5 comments. I don't know if I want to.
It's funny we're talking about football earlier. I was thinking, I was watching it last night, and I was thinking it's more and more like FIFA, just with human, biological FIFA. They've even got
They started with the VAR stuff, didn't they? So
they've got crowd noises and all sorts of stuff.
Oh God, you're joking.
No.
They are. Jason.
No. What?
Theme tune.
Good evening and welcome to Raconteurs News on this Monday evening. It's the 22nd of June 2020. And happy birthday to my mate Eve as well. I forgot about that until I just mentioned that there. I think we might have a bit of a loud problem from you there, Owen. Owen, yeah. It just might be a bit loud. Sorry, anyway. Good evening, anyway, welcome to Raconteurs News. It's Monday, and we've got a guest, and of course I've got my mate Owen, Lloyd Martin, who is co-hosting with me. I'll let you know later. Good evening, Owen. How are you doing, mate?
I'm not too bad, Jason. Not too bad at all. Sweltering in the heat.
It sounds like it. We can tell we've got a bit. We did that at first, I think, but I think it's sorted itself out. I'm feeling a bit of heat coming from you. You know what I mean? I don't know what it is.
Radiating from my forehead.
Anyway, listen, just one show this week because, like I said last week, I owe my wife some time. I owe us our relationship some time, and I did, I think, 4 shows last week. 2, a couple of my own of our shows, and then we went on some other shows, didn't we, Owen? Most notably, Uni Black Sister. We went on his show. It was incredible, and of course we went on Webby's show as well for the round table. Anyway, good evening. How are you doing, Owen?
I'm not too bad, Jason. 38 degrees here today in Portugal. I'm on top of the world with good reason, but I'm not going to go into that now. Things are changing in my life for the better. Not giving much away apart from that. As soon as I find a property, you'll know more. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, well, as long as it's good, mate, that's all.
Absolutely, it's good. You can't get any better than this, and I know somebody's watching tonight, and talk to you later.
Patrick Nee says, "Hi, Owen, you have a nice tan." Well, if it's 38 degrees, what does he expect?
Facted by Patrick. It's been facted by Patrick. I can recommend that to anybody.
Anyway, our guest is somebody I've known. I've never met in person, but I've known for a number of years. He's a blogger, writer, does all this music. It's music and the occult and the Beatles is his particular speciality. So let's just welcome Matt Conspiro Sergiou. I'll just call you Matt from now on. Good evening, Matt. How are you, mate?
Hello, all right. Sorry about this. This is my ceiling. Maybe after you've heard me talking, you might think that's more interesting to look at. I don't know. This happened the last time we were on. I don't know what's going on. I've got a chair behind me, the actual chair that I use for the computer, and I had it on the highest level, and it was like this. And I've got another chair, and I've got a cushion on top of it, and I'm still, and the computer's down here. So
Matt is really 6'4", ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. 6 inches more like. God. Yeah, so I don't know what this is all about, but yeah, hey, happy to be here. Yeah.
How have you been doing, Matt? Anyway, how have been these last few weeks? How's it affected you, and what have you made of it? We'll get this out of the way right at the very beginning.
Well, the thing is, we were meant to do this. When was it? 2 months ago? 3 months ago? Sometime we booked it in ages before, and then I think it was 2 weeks after the lockdown in the UK came down on us, pretty much unexpected in the way it happened. It just didn't seem appropriate to do it back then, did it? To me, it didn't seem appropriate. You know, we're in the middle of this situation, which is still going on now, obviously, but back then, back 3 months ago, when the lockdown began, we were right in the thick of it then. And all these things that we've been talking about, that some of us that have been researching this for over 10 years now, was seemingly all happening all at once. So, you know, we were all, you know, kind of like preoccupied with that, obviously, because it's a life-changing thing, which is still going on now. But we were in it at that point. We were so in it that it just didn't seem appropriate to me to come on and talk about the Beatles, or, you know, talking about the 1960s counterculture scene, which is something else that I look at as well, in the British, the London counterculture scene. It just didn't seem like the right thing to be doing at that time. You know, people watching this probably thinking at the time, so what? You know, we're going through shit and we're talking about the 1960s. So I should have been on, what was it, 2-3 months ago, but here I am now. But how am I taking it? Well, I live in a lockdown life anyway. So in that regard, it hasn't, obviously there have been changes in terms of me and my wife. You know, we work for a living. We've got, my wife's got a business. She had to close down. Her family have got a business that had to close down, and that was in catering as well. Her parents have got, her mum's got a business in catering that she runs with her sons, my wife's brothers, my brother-in-laws. So, you know, in that regard, in the work respect, there was a lot of heavy stuff to deal with. But yeah, like I say, I live pretty much a lockdown life. I research every day. I don't go out to the pub. I don't go out socialising much. I don't go clubbing anymore. I just like to sit at home and research. So for me, to be stuck at home for 2-3 months was okay, you know, in that regard. And I also live in a town which I suppose isn't that important in terms of the UK. If you're looking at places where the authorities would like to go and close things down and be stringent with the rules, the town where I live, which is a seaside town on the east coast of the UK, isn't really a big deal. You know, I could, you know, during the lockdown, you know, I could walk out and go for a walk, go for my bike ride every day, go to the market, get some fresh fruit and veg and stuff. And there wasn't too many changes going on because it is a small town. We didn't have police driving up and down the road checking everybody out or any of that kind of thing. I suppose the town where I live isn't really deemed too important, but now I'm starting to see stuff that's really getting on my wick, you know, like going to shops and standing on stickers and seeing people walking around with masks on for absolutely no reason at all, and just stuff like this. And yeah, it's, I don't think it's affecting me as much as it is people say in London or Manchester or Bristol or Liverpool, or so yeah, I'm doing okay. Yeah.
But pretty much same for me, you know, in my situation. It's I've not really noticed much difference. The couple of times that I have been out, I've noticed the crap on the floor and stuff like that. Every shop, even the smaller shops, got a one-way system in it and all that nonsense. But I think as a trio, Owen there in Portugal, I mean, he's been off lockdown for 5 or 6 weeks now.
We're on week 5 of lockdown, but even before that, when it all did start, I did pretty much, as you guys know, as I'm sure people that are watching internet will know, I spent 2 years in isolation myself because being with my now ex-wife, when she left, obviously I was in the middle of a village in the middle of nowhere. I didn't drive, couldn't get out, so I was basically, I mean, the times that I first appeared on Raconteurs News, it was showing all the fruit and veg that I was growing in my garden, because that's what I had to do, you know. But so, like you were saying, Matt, the lockdown itself, and in particular, like I say, we've always had, even before lockdown, we've had the bread man, the fish man, and the grocery man that comes round every week anyway. So it's not really made a difference. And as I was saying, the other time you have the difference is when you go into the towns and the cities.
That's right. That's when I notice it, when you actually go into the town centre.
Yeah.
See it, see the madness. Zombie land is what it's like in my town centre. It's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, when we were right in the lockdown, I mean, this is how ridiculous it is. I'm always the one that complains, right? Doesn't matter what it is. I'm always the one, if a train service goes wrong, I'll be the moody old git who gets up and says, this is outrageous. That's just the way I've always been. And it really angers me that other people don't feel that. You know, when you pay £200 for a train ticket, and you get thrown off the train and sent to another platform, and you have to run about with your bags and stuff because, again, they've fucked up, you know, the trains, and you're thinking, well, I paid £200 and I complain, you know, and I can't believe that other people just sit there and take it and don't even get slightly annoyed. Boots, the chemist, was one of the worst ones during the lockdown, and what they were doing was people who needed to get their prescriptions. I don't know if it was the same across the UK or whether it's done branch by branch. Maybe they have different ways of protocol for different branches across the country. But where I was, people who needed to get a prescription, this Boots where I live is massive. It's got 2 floors and it's absolutely massive on both floors. You could probably fit about 1,000 people in the bottom, maybe the same, a little bit less above. And they were only letting 2 people in at a time. You've got all these people standing in the cold in this really long line that just went on and on and on and on. And my wife was standing there. She had to get a prescription for her mum, who really got caught up in this COVID thing, and she got a bit frightened and she didn't want to leave the house. So my wife was standing in the queue to get this prescription, and I said to her, wait a minute, I'm just going to pop off somewhere. I'll be back here. I'll be back in half an hour. And I came back half an hour. She's still standing in exactly the same spot.
Wow.
No, nothing has moved. Then it transpires. I look up and I see people coming in and out of the shop, members of staff, presumably, and they're walking off, coming back, walking off, coming back. But the queue's not moving. It transpired. They'd locked the door and gone off for an hour's lunch break and didn't tell the people in the queue that were standing in the rain that they were going for a lunch break. So they left them standing there. And when we found out, I went absolutely fucking livid. I said, this is fucking outrageous. There's people standing here who need to get their medication. They're probably getting more ill, standing in the rain, waiting for something. These people haven't even got the decency to tell them, excuse me, everybody, we're going off for our lunch break. We'll be back in half an hour or whatever it was. And I was the only person that got angry. And I'm looking around at these people in the queue. Who were the actual people that were standing in the queue? I wasn't even standing in the queue. I walked off and come back. They're the ones that are actually suffering. And they're just standing there staring at their phones. Not one person had a thing to say. Not one person. And that is pretty much representative of what I've experienced everywhere I've been in the town centre. People are not getting angry. They're not complaining. They're giving in to the subservience. They're just standing there. And then they don't seem annoyed. They don't seem at all stirred by it. Not half asleep. A town of zombies. It is zombie land, you know.
It's weird, isn't it? It's weird how people
react.
It's completely weird. And I noticed our neighbours next door, or I don't know whether it's from, they're either from China or Malaysia or somewhere like that, but, you know, I can tell by the look of them, shall we say. I'm not fucking racially profiling the world like that. But they're all walking past with the masks, you know, with the masks on and stuff.
The Asian people.
Yeah.
It is. I've noticed the same thing. And I'm thinking, God, yeah, all right then. Okay. You know, make of that what you will.
And then I saw this woman who got these blue rubber gloves on, and had got what I looked like a black thong that she'd got over her. It was just weird. It were, you know, the couple of times I've been out. Anyway, we've done COVID, haven't we? Right. Let's
wish we had.
Can I say hello to a few people in the chat room, Jason?
Yes, you do. Go ahead.
Good evening to Patrick, Midnight Gardener, Paula Callick, Blazing Stars, Mandy Green, Tom, Blazing Stars is there, the Uni Black System, we've had enough, Misha, Bandit Buster, Dean, and Marco Serengeti. If I've missed anybody, I do apologise. We'll catch up with you later on. Jason.
We certainly will. Matt, anyway, what are we going to talk about? I don't know whether you want to talk about Beatles or whether you want to talk about. I've got to be honest. I scanned the last blog post that you did pretty much today. They're talking about Decca.
The record companies,
the record companies and all that stuff. I don't know whether you want to go into that or whether you've got any new Beatles stuff for us, because we're always happy for new Beatles stuff. And if there's anything that you need me to get, like pictures or photos or anything like that, if you just let me know where they are, and I'll get them, and I'll be able to post them up.
Gosh, the Beatles thing just is like a continuous thing. I've got articles that I've already written and published, which are on my occult Beatles website, and then I've got stuff that I'm currently looking into, which is a work in progress. So I know some of the details of what I'm looking at, and other bits need further research. So, and then there's other stuff that I'm aware of that I know I need to get into, but I haven't got the time for. So it's just, where do I start? What do I go with? I don't know. It could talk about, it could talk about the recent article on Conspiro Media, my other site, the record company one. I mean, it's completely up to you. I mean, throw something at me and see where I go.
Yeah, well, I've got that here. I've got that right in front of me. It's very
I can't remember the title. Is it the Music Military Intelligence Complex ? Is that what it's called? Or is
that's what it is, yeah.
The music, government.
It talks about EMI, Decca, all these different companies, and how they began putting out music in 1929. And then they got involved in the military industrial complex and radar and stuff like that. Really interesting stuff. Like I say, I've had to skip through it, and I do know that there are places where you say, I don't know. So, but this is what somebody's told me, but I don't know the source of this sort of thing. So it's a really honest one as well. Give us a bit of a rundown on that.
Okay, well, I've got two websites. I've got Conspiro Media and I've got the Occult Beatles. Obviously, the Occult Beatles is about Bay City Rollers. For anyone who remembers them, I could just about remember them. No, okay, so it's the Occult Beatles is about the Beatles, and then I've got Conspiro Media, which I started in 2011, I think it was. And when I started it then, it's moved on since then. The focus of it has gone completely somewhere else. I mean, when I started that, basically the idea of it back then was to have a blog, which there still isn't. And I was trying to do it then single-handedly. What a stupid idiot. There's no way I could have done it on my own. There's no way I can. Basically, I wanted it to be a blog where I wanted it to be a resource for anything that was to do with music or movies or TV, media, to do with the occult and conspiracy, but that was going on at that time, so topical stuff. So if something happened, like there was a record in the charts or a track in the charts that had some kind of occult connotation or a link to some conspiracy or something, I'd pick up on it and write an article, publish it, move on, go on to something else, and to keep it rolling all the time. But the problem is, the way I work, and which is what I discovered being new to the game back then, is I can't do it like that. I have to keep researching. I can't just put any old thing up. I have to check the source. If I find something out, I have to double check it. I have to check it again and again, and then you go down rabbit holes. When you find, if you research things like this or any area of research, once you get into one particular subject, you find you go off. You find other things. You're typing away and you find this thing. You think, bloody hell! Oh my God, and that takes you somewhere else. So Conspiro Media, the way I wanted it to be, which was this continuously rolling site of posts, didn't happen that way because the articles were taking too long to write and to publish. So there was gaps. And not only that, I was getting bored writing about Nicki Minaj, Britney Spears, you know, the One Eye, I mean, it's all applicable stuff. It's all useful stuff, but it's not really what excites me, you know? What excites me, what is 60s music. I don't know why, because I didn't live through the 60s, but I love 60s music, and I'm fascinated by the history of it, and especially the Beatles. I mean, I won't talk about it now, because I've talked about it on a previous show with you guys about why I got into the Beatles from being a child. So I obviously felt comfortable to write about the Beatles. That's another thing. I feel comfortable writing about them because I've followed them since I was a child, and I've followed their story. So it's something that I can do just like that, you know, whereas with Britney Spears or somebody like that, you know, like I give a shit, you know. So that's where Conspiro Media has moved away from that, and what I'm looking at now is the 1960s scene. You guys will know Dave McGowan. You'll be you know, the work that Dave McGowan did with Laurel Canyon. It just dawned on me, if there was a Laurel Canyon in America, like their version of a military industrial intelligence complex with connections to the Soviet, if these sort of things were going on in America, it must have been happening in the 60s. It must have been happening in London, in Britain as well, because it just had to, because the Beatles were like the flag wave bearers of the 60s counterculture. Well, they're British. The word psychedelic comes from a British doctor. LSD was given to Timothy Leary by an Englishman, Michael Hollingshead. He was the actual guy who gave Timothy Leary his first acid trip, which then, you know, began the 60s counterculture. So that's basically where Conspiro Media is now. That's what I'm concentrating on. You'll find a lot of posts about the 60s counterculture scene and all the various strands that connect into it on my Facebook page, Conspiro Media Facebook. But it's only now that I'm actually starting to write articles about this stuff on the actual blog. And the first one, or the first of a few in a long time, actually got published last week. And this one about record companies. And this takes it back basically to the beginning. And I'm trying to keep it British, because enough has been said about America, but what people got to realise is, they don't realise already, is that Britain was integral to pop music culture, whether it be in the 1960s with the Beatles and the Beat group era, or afterwards with the hippie thing. Britain was right at the forefront of that, and for some reason historians haven't looked at that, both mainstream or alternative haven't looked at that. So yeah, so with this record company thing, what you find is that what I've found is, and I discovered this a few years ago and I put it on the back burner, but in recent weeks I thought I'd dip into it. And what I found is that a lot of the record companies that were supporting the sort of the beginning of the counterculture era in the 1950s with rock and roll, and then continued to support it with the counterculture in the 60s through bands like the Stones, the Beatles, the Small Faces, Deep Purple, not Deep Purple, Black Sabbath, but that's pretty much more 70s, isn't it? But Pink Floyd as well. All these bands belonged to certain labels that have connections to the military complex. One of those is Decca Records, like you mentioned, Jason. And because this article is so new, I've actually got all the notes here. I'm afraid I'm scared of forgetting stuff, and I want to get this as straight as possible. But what do you want to know about Decca? Well, let me just have a look here. It actually started in the 1910s as the Decca Graphophone Company. And what it did back then basically was make machines to play what you would call now records. So it didn't actually make music when it started for about the first 10 or 15 years or something. It was only in the late 20s when an English stockbroker bought the company, a stockbroker by the name of Edward Lewis. He took it over, and he said, look, we've got to get into music because, you know, this is where the money is. So that's when they started to make records, and they signed artists like Louis Armstrong, Billie Holiday was another one, Judy Garland. This is sort of around the 1930s, between the 30s and the 40s. And then they got into, with the outbreak of war, they began to supply radar to the British during the Second World War. It actually,
my dad. Sorry,
yeah,
my dad still actually has old slate Decca records.
Wow, they're going to be worth a few quid now.
Yeah, sorry, Matt. Sorry for interrupting.
Oh no, no, that's all right. Gave me a chance to look at my notes, because they got into radar development in the late 30s, so a little bit before the war. It took them a while into the war to actually get accepted by the military with their experiments with radar, because I think at this time radar was quite a new thing, wasn't it? Sort of, you're talking 1930s, early 30s to the late 30s. It was still a pretty new kind of thing. So people were developing it. EMI was another one that was developing it, but Decca was another one. Decca was the home of Lonnie Donegan, who started the skiffle craze, and from skiffle you got in the 50s, you got rock and roll. Lonnie Donegan was the guy who basically influenced bands like the Rolling Stones and the Beatles to form bands, because skiffle was like punk. It was like that same principle. Basically, you don't have to have musical knowledge to play in a skiffle band. You just get any old instrument you can. They used to use tea chest basses and stick them on like broomsticks and have a tea chest at the bottom and put strings on it and go pluck, 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 like teenage schoolboy bands. So it was very, very DIY. So so if you didn't have musical training for a teenager like John Lennon or Paul McCartney or Mick Jagger or whatever, that was an influence for them. They thought, well, if this guy can do it and get in the charts, this Lonnie Donegan, we can do it. We can form bands. So he was a Decca artist. So he definitely had an influence on what was to come. Another artist signed to Decca with the Rolling Stones. So anyway, so these were the artists that later signed to Decca after the war. But during the war, actually before the war, it was...
During the war?
Yes,
Sorry, I was just reading that bit actually, a bit during the war while you were talking. Then I was just reading.
Oh right, you're reading it. You do it really well. To look like you're reading it. You do it really well. You got a good poker face.
I'm reading it, and some interesting stuff that they did. I mean, the thing I'm looking at here is, it was after Haddy was asked by the RAF to record the noise of German submarine propellers, that Decca got its that Decca Records got its revolutionary post-war sound. And so what they were doing is they were getting the noise of the German submarine propeller.
Yeah. Basically, there was a guy called Harvey Schwartz. He was a Decca engineer for the label, so he was into music. It was nothing to do with intelligence or military. And he approached the boss of Decca, this guy that I mentioned earlier, this stockbroker, and he sent him a letter apparently on the day that war broke out in Britain, so September 39. He sent a letter to Easton suggesting that they get into radar, that this is a good place to go. So they started to experiment with radar, and it was 1941, 1942 that they started to, that they were actually accepted by the British military, and I think they had a part in the D-Day landings. I think it was the Decca navigator system that was used in the D-Day landings of 1944. Was it on the beaches of Normandy, France?
Yeah.
And it was actually the Decca navigator system. Is, if you look at some of the because Decca don't like talking about this. Well, Decca doesn't really exist anymore, really, as a label. I mean, it's still there and it still releases records, but in terms of it being a fully fledged operational hands on deck kind of thing, it's been bought out since then, so it's not really. But yeah, they're not very forthcoming with their information about their war history, whether it was in the Second World War or post-war, the radar they projects they got involved with, which they certainly did after the war. But yeah, so they got into it in during the Second World War, and yeah, so they have this Decca navigator system. But yeah, what you're talking about is after the war, they brought out this new style of sound. They called it a revolutionary style of sound. It was called FFRR, full frequency range recordings, I think it was called, and it was used on a lot of their records. So a lot of these culture changing records that you were getting in the 50s and 60s presumably would have had this FFRR. It's on a lot of their labels as well. It's on the Decca labels. If you look, you'll see full frequency range recordings. But the actual technology that they used for that in the music industry actually came from the war. And it's this Arthur Haddy, who was another Decca engineer, I think he was. He was a sound engineer. He worked with people like Bing Crosby, and he was a studio engineer. And it's Arthur Haddy that had something to do with this this experiment you're talking about. And what it was to put it in a nutshell, basically the British forces, the RAF, as they were flying above the sea, they needed to track the submarines under the water, and they had to be able to tell the difference between the British subs and the German subs. The thing is, from what I understand from what I've read, I think I've got this right, it was very, very difficult for the British pilots in the planes to pinpoint the sound, to be able to tell the difference between a British sub with the radar, a British sub and a German sub. And what happened a few times was they chucked some bombs in anyway and blew some of their own instead of the German ones. So it was the RAF's idea, apparently. What the RAF said, they said, okay, well, I'll tell you what you should do. We should record that sound. They had underwater microphones. I don't know how they did this, but there were underwater microphones fitted. I really don't know how they managed to pull that one off, but apparently that's what they did. They had underwater microphones fitted, and they recorded both. They recorded the British submarine propellers, but they had a captured German sub, and they recorded that. They recorded the propeller moving on, and they had to. What Decca Records had to do was they had to specially invent a new disc cutter to be able to record these sounds onto disc, and that's what they did. Decca Records invented a new disc cutter, which they then gave to the RAF when they recorded the propeller sounds. So then the British forces could tell the difference. Before they went out on a mission, they could tell which ones were the German subs and which ones were the British ones. That technology, that same disc cutter, was then later used for the FFRR sound, which was revolutionary in recorded sound in the music industry. So you could say basically that what we got from Decca Records in terms of revolutionary sound actually came from war. You know, war. And EMI.
What is it good for?
Excuse me?
So you said war, and I said, what is it good for?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. I mean, that's really interesting that they had a wartime presence in the military, and I suppose that those two industries coming together, the military and then Decca, which was into recordings. I mean, gramophones have been around for a long time, haven't they? And
yeah,
but this was a new way of actually doing it, recording it rather than playing it. But it's interesting. They came together and then they never really separated, did they?
No. Decca carried on. It carried on. EMI did a similar thing. It revolutionized stereo. It was. I'll move on to that in a minute if you want, because that stereo sound actually was helped by the war. It was actually helped to prosper, and it was used. The principles that we used during the war were then used afterwards. So the stereo sound that we now have is in some ways partly thanks to the Second World War. It's crazy. I mean, the fact that this stuff never gets out, you know, this should be taught in schools, because it's, you know. But anyway, so yeah, Decca did after the war. It set up, because its Decca navigation system was such a success apparently during the D-Day landings. What they did was they set up a company afterwards, a subsidiary of Decca Records. So basically, it's working hand in hand with the record making department, and it was called the Decca Navigator Company, and it was partly run by this Harvey Schwartz, who used to be an engineer at Decca. So one of the places that Decca was working, apparently, I just remembered a quote. I can't remember word for word what the quote was, but there's an interesting website where you can go. Because as I say, Decca haven't been very forthcoming about their history during the war. They should be. There's nothing really to hide, really. I mean, if this is all it is. But there's a website that you can find. I can't remember the name of the website offhand, but it's run by a radio radar enthusiast. And basically what he's done is he's collated all this different stuff and a lot of it from people who actually worked for Decca navigator systems after the war, some of them during as well. And there was a quote that Decca Navigator Systems, the actual company that dealt in this, became so huge after the war and up until the 1980s. The 1990s actually it stopped. That's when the business of it stopped. That they were operating in every continent apart from South America. So that's pretty huge.
Very organised then. Very much world organised.
Super organised. They didn't just work for the British military. They also worked for the US government. There's this thing I read. Apparently they used to use the radars for private firms as well. So for oil rigs to locate good places to put oil rigs, they'd use their Decca radar system. But they also had this thing. The US government paid Decca to work on undersea bases for the military. And I haven't been able to find anything else out about that at all, apart from Decca were the only company that was able to take this job on, which just kind of shows how huge they've got. But yeah, one of the places that, so here we are in the 1960s, they've got bands like the Rolling Stones, and David Bowie, I think, was on Decca for a little bit before he went off and went to RCA, I think it was, and then found fame or whatever. Literally fame. During the 60s, while the Rolling Stones are, shoving their fingers up to the man, Decca Records is supplying radar to the US Army in Vietnam, actually going over to Vietnam, fitting the radars into the helicopters, and giving the US troops training on their Decca navigator system. And if you go take a look at the article on Conspiro Media, you'll find a couple of insignias actually taken from patches taken from uniforms. And I think it says Decca Air Unit on it. It's got a helicopter on it. And they were huge. And I think there was and I actually start the article with a quote from Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones. And this was about this was 1970, 71, and he was talking to Rolling Stone magazine. And this was about a year before, or somewhere around then, before they left the record company. No, that's it. It was just after they'd left Decca Records. And he says one of the reasons that the Rolling Stones left Decca Records was because they found out that they were building, in his words, little black boxes to bomb and kill bastards in Vietnam. That's one of the reasons why the Rolling Stones left Decca Records. But from what you'll find, it doesn't matter where you go, you'll find that there's these links to in other record companies as well.
So with the military connection there, then just thinking of recent things that have been on in the past, then Decca will probably have a hand in the goings on in the Antarctic. Would you say? I think they had an involvement in the Falklands. Right.
I'm not sure. They were still going then, but I think they didn't fold as a business until the early 90s, maybe. But the thing is, it's really sketchy, man. It's really, really sketchy to find out stuff about Decca and their military stuff, because a lot of the stuff that I've found, as I say, has been from this website that this guy's put together, from old employees of Decca who are happy to talk about their time. Other places you've got to find them in books. It's all over the place, because Decca don't have any source of their own. They do not have their own place where they do this kind of thing, where they offer this information out at all. Not at all. There might be a few little bits and pieces, but there is no actual archive site where you can go for Decca Records and find out stuff about the military, about their involvement with the military. But I think they had connections to Nimrod as well. They were fitting them into Nimrods as well. Huge. I mean, absolutely huge. They weren't just like dabbling. They were full into it, and this is running hand in hand or side by side with the record industry part of it.
Well, to say that they were the forerunners in their field, and as you say, they ceased to be in the 1990s. Yeah. I would say, did they?
Exactly, that's the
The
thing. Yeah,
advanced technology that we have today, you know, obviously they must have a part in that, surely.
yeah, under a different name. You know, playing
Yeah.
tricks with company names, just registering the same company but under a different name. Yeah, yeah, I've thought of that. Yeah, yeah. But EMI was the same. I mean, their as I say, stereo sound was an EMI invention, pretty much. That was Alan D. Bloomline, I think his name was, and he's one of these kind of. He died in an air crash that some people might find in I can't remember. It was during the war sometime, but he was only like 35, 36 years old in an air crash that was deemed an accident. But some people don't believe that. He was one of these kind of genius type people. He was a sound engineer at EMI, another sound engineer, and he was also in electronics. He specialised especially in electronics. As I say, he was one of these genius type people, a mad inventor type person, but not just mad. He was actually coming up with some good stuff like stereo sound, which he called at the time, he called it binaural sound. That's what he called it. And apparently he came up with the idea for stereo one night when he went to the cinema with his wife. He was sitting there watching the screen and he was thinking, the speakers, right, they should be representative of the human ear. But what I'm getting now, he was thinking to himself, while I'm sitting in this cinema, is you've got a guy on the screen who's moving from one side of the screen to the other side of the screen, but the speakers don't represent the human ear in that respect, because you're getting everything, all the volume, coming at you from both speakers, where he should be moving from one side of the screen to the other side of the screen. The voice should travel with him. So that was his idea. So he started to look at stereo sound, and he was still working on that. During the war, again, I'm not a very technical person. I'm not very, when it comes to how transistors work and all that kind of stuff, I really don't know. I'm not a scientific person. So, if anyone wants to read this article and look into it and think, I know something about why this might have applied to this, then great, that's brilliant. If you can let me know, that'd be great. But apparently, for some reason, the principles behind stereo that he'd been working on fitted perfectly with VIE, which is VIE, which was visual indicator equipment. What it was another form of radar. And again, if you go look at the article on my site, you'll find the picture of actually what it is. It was EMI built. It just tracks. It's a tracker. It's a radar tracker. And if you look at the photograph on the website, it's fitted onto a sound locator. They were called sound locator. All of this was built by EMI, all of it. And what it is, it's like these three massive, great big, like the old gramophone players with the big horn speakers. It's like three of those, but like huge, massive ones, sitting on like a truck type thing with wheels. And it's like a mobile sound locator. So presumably what you do is you drive this thing to wherever you need it to go. So basically the principles behind building this were picked up from what Bloomline was doing with stereo to do with sound. So again, and then after the war, slowly stereo began to be introduced into music. This is the thing. This is what I should have said at the start. Stereo was actually used in a wartime setting before it was used in music. That's what happened. It was invented, Bloomline came up with this sometime in the mid-30s, I think it was, the stereo principle, working it and making it happen. But it wasn't until the mid-1950s that stereo actually became popular in recorded sound, on records, on vinyl. So, like I say, stereo's actual roots, in terms of it being used for things, was actually in a war setting. Yeah, there it is. There's the picture. Oh, it's 4 cones. Okay, 4 of them. Yeah, there you go. EMI's anti-aircraft sound locator designed to incorporate Bloomline's visual indicator equipment. VIE. Yeah, VIE. Yeah, so there you go. So this is what EMI was doing. And all this work that was going on at a place in Hayes, which is in London. It's this massive research unit. This is where Bloomline was working with his stereo experiments. It's also where all the military radar experiments and manufacturing and research was going on, but it was also the same building that was the factory for pressing the records, for mastering the sound of all the records that we got in the 60s and the 70s. The Beatles Revolver album, the Sergeant Pepper album, also was pressed and mastered there. Also albums by Queen, Pink Floyd, Black Sabbath. So I think Black Sabbath were on the Harvest label, which is an offshoot of EMI. So I might be wrong there, but I think I'm right. Actually, I think I'm right. Yeah, it's on the Harvest label. I think Pink Floyd were on the Harvest label for a little bit as well in the late 60s to early 70s. And then they went to EMI. They changed the label and everything. But basically, it's all the same company. It's EMI. So yeah, all this stuff was going on in the same building. So if you're looking for, you know, the question that someone might be asking right now, so what's the link between music and military? Well, there's one link at least, that this was all going on, the research of military stuff and the pressing and the mastering and the research of stereo sound and music was all going on in this one massive building in Hayes in London.
It didn't take long though, did it? I mean, once these two things had come together, it didn't take long for one to realise that how much the other one could advance their cause, advance that what they were thinking. Because we're only talking about 50s when rock and roll really started and everything, and there's a heavy military involvement in that as well, isn't there? I mean, some of the people who were in it were sons or daughters of military people and all that sort of thing. So I mean, it's something that started. You could perhaps put the start of it, this relationship, in the beginning of the war, and then it's never come apart.
It's never stopped. No, it's never stopped. I mean, officially it stopped, but like Owen says, it could be still carrying on, but under a different name. You know, they've just cooked the books, if you like, and just put a different name. But yeah, I mean, Decca could still be doing it, but under a different name. Yeah, but it didn't stop it. I mean, they could have stopped it. They could have just said, all right, the war is over. The Second World War is over. We've done our bit for our country. Let's move on and do what we're supposed to do. But they didn't. You know, they carried on. Thorn EMI, I mean, again, EMI, after the war, it carried on developing radar and stuff. And then in the late 70s, it was 1979, it was EMI, which stands for Electrical Musical Industries, or thereabouts, was bought out by Thorn, which was an electrical company, and it bought EMI, and it became Thorn EMI. And once it did that, throughout the 80s and into the 90s, while it was a going company before it got broken off and sold off to different places, it was one of the largest defence contractors in the United Kingdom. So, and at the time that they were doing this, they were buying other record companies as well. They bought Chrysalis Records as well sometime the late 80s, early 90s, which, who was on Chrysalis? Ultravox. I always remember the sleeve of an Ultravox record. They were on. Billy Idol was on there, Blondie, Jethro Tull. So they bought Chrysalis. They also bought Virgin as well, if I'm not mistaken. And the irony is, if I'm not wrong, I think they did buy Virgin. The Rolling Stones went to Virgin I think it was in the 90s. So there's the Rolling Stones saying we don't want any part of the military-industrial complex, blah, blah, blah. So they leave and go and form their own thing. And then in the 1990s, they signed this multi-million-pound deal with Virgin, which essentially is owned by Thorn EMI, which is a defence music company, and which is actually more scandal-ridden and bigger than Decca ever was, really, because Thorn EMI got stuck into a couple of scandals in the late 80s, early 90s. I think one of the things they got pulled over the coals for at the time, and again, it's not been really properly reported on, really, is just, I think it was just after the end of the Iraq-Iran war, and just before we went into that the so-called first Gulf War, which had Iraq against America and Britain, essentially. It turns out that Thorn EMI had welcomed to Great Britain six, I think it was a number of 6 of Saddam Hussein's Iraqi officers over to, they invited them over to come over to London to be trained in the Cymbeline radar, which was something that Thorn EMI was developing. So they were giving them training, and the scandal of that is that around that same time, what was going on was that officially speaking, the British government was neutral in terms of whether it was Iraq or Iran. Officially speaking, it wasn't Iraq or Iran. So officially speaking, as far as the British government was concerned, under Margaret Thatcher at the time, Prime Minister, they were neutral. But they got around this by awarding or providing export insurance to various companies under the heading of civil projects. But the companies that were going for these civil projects were essentially defence companies. And Thorn EMI was one of those companies that got into this civil project export insurance scandal. They were given the go-ahead to carry on providing, which I think is interesting when you read the reports. It's not to provide, it's to carry on providing. So how long was this going on? To carry on providing radar, the Cymbeline radar, to the Iraqi forces over in Iraq, and also to go over to Iraq themselves and to train Iraqi officers how to use the radars. This is what was going on at the time, that all this stuff was going on in the Middle East, and Britain was supposed to be keeping away from it. It was actually awarding companies to go ahead and do all this stuff. And there was another scandal that Thorn EMI got involved in. It was the Al Yamama arms deals. It was called Al Yamama. It was a series of arms deals that I think began in the late 80s, early 90s, and it carried on into the 2000s. And what people discovered is that these companies, these defense companies like Thorn EMI, were basically giving the Saudi Arabians, this is what the deal was between the Saudi royal family, the ruling Saudi royal family, and the British government. And what they found was that Thorn EMI and many other companies as well were giving these Saudi royal family members commissions, quote unquote, which is another word for bribes, basically. So they were bribing the Saudi royal family to get defense contracts. And one of the former heads of Thorn EMI, I think his name is Sir Colin Southgate, actually reportedly came out and said, yeah, so what? Nothing illegal about that, it's business.
Yeah, country was open.
And meanwhile, they're releasing records by the Spice Girls or whatever, this stuff's going down.
Lots of questions in the chat room, Jason, isn't there? Lots of questions coming in.
Yeah, people have asked what you think about certain individuals. I mean, we've got Blazing Stars wants to know how Miley Cyrus fits in, or how he fits into Miley Cyrus. We've also had a question on Malcolm McLaren and one on PID, but I don't know what that one. I don't know.
That's Paul is dead. That's PID. That's Paul is dead.
Start there then. I'll go backwards. No, it's up to you.
Well, Miley Cyrus, like I said at the beginning, I've really gone off that stuff now. I don't even pretend to. I can't pretend. You know what I mean? It got to the point, like I said before, where I was writing articles about people like Britney Spears and all this stuff going on. But I was coming at it from someone who wasn't interested in their career, in terms of I don't dig it. I have to be interested in the music or the scene to be able to give it something that I've learned. It's a life experience thing. And I thought I wasn't being true to myself, going on, putting together this Conspiro Media site. I felt like I was lying to myself, not being honest with myself, by publishing stories and articles that were okay. They're good articles, but they're about people that I don't really have any interest in. And I just felt, so that's why I moved away, and I've gone into all the 60s and the Beatles. So I really don't know what to say about Miley Virus, apart from she's really annoys me, and crap.
I was just going to say, I mean, you're perhaps not the guy to write that. You've probably written enough articles that have been particularly on the same line, when it comes to Miley Virus and
yeah.
comes to Lady Gaga and when I've never heard of for ages, and that what's her face? What's that other one?
Katy Perry.
No, the other one. That other weird looking one. Nicki Minaj. Yeah. So you find yourself writing the same article time after time. Same stuff. It's the same symbolism.
Same stuff. It's this. They're related to someone where they got abused. They've got triangles and pyramids and cybertronics and AI in their videos, and it's on and on. And it got to the point where I think, oh God, it's the same stuff. And there are people that can do it better than me, that do it better than me. Vigilant Citizen, for one. Why should I be doing stuff that Vigilant Citizen is doing a lot better than me? He's got an understanding of symbols and the pop music thing. Freeman Fly, he's another one that seems to have a thing for pop music and that kind of pop music, like Katy Perry and stuff like that. No, it's not that it doesn't interest me, but it doesn't interest me enough to think, do I really want to dedicate my life and to bring something to the world that I think is valuable? I can't do that because I don't feel it, and I don't think it's going to come out that way. It's going to come out true, and
So well, anyway, we've got two left. We've got Malcolm McLaren, and then the Paul is dead. So Malcolm McLaren, famously with the Sex Pistols.
Yeah. What about Malcolm? Well,
somebody just said, what was your opinion on him? That's all.
Well, it's just an opinion, and that's after watching. Have you seen the film The Great Rock and Roll Swindle?
Yeah.
I've not.
Oh,
you should watch that. Yeah, you should watch that, Owen. You might see if this is the way that you see it. This is the way I see it. Basically, what Malcolm McLaren is saying in this, and John Lydon, Johnny Rotten, has absolutely annihilated or tried to annihilate Malcolm McLaren about this film, saying it's all lies. And maybe he might think that. You know the fact that what Malcolm McLaren is saying basically in this movie is that punk and the Sex Pistols are all fake. It was all premeditated. The punk thing was premeditated. The Sex Pistols were premeditated. Malcolm McLaren was basically this guy who came along and pulled these people in and created the punk thing. So basically, punk is false. It's a false thing.
Yeah,
like
because they gave him the tag, didn't they? Malcolm McLaren also said that he reinvented the anarchy, the phrase anarchy, and attached that to the whole punk movement. That's one thing that I read.
Oh, right, okay.
The whole anarchy was reintroduced into the punk era, let's say. It was symbolised by a lot, Stiff Little Fingers, those kind of guys around that time. But I want to ask you just quickly on that. I know you wanted to go into the PID thing, but you're talking about the counterculture in the 1960s. Now, I know with my parents are Jamaican, and they went to London in the 50s and 60s, and my dad in particular was one of those guys that came from Jamaica that would build the speakers up and build the amps up with the valves and everything else like that. And as he said, they would first of all, they would do it in a local like gospel church on a week, on a Saturday where they were allowed to have the church on. They'd be setting up all these speakers. But obviously, it was at the time when ska music came in and everything else. So going back to the thing with Decca and these bands that were on the Decca label, have you come across anything during that time that may say that this influence that came in the Windrush days, did it have an effect on what the Decca, I'll call it the Decca movement, had at the time? Have you come across anything like that? Not
with Decca in particular, no. But I mean, Notting Hill was big, wasn't it? I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
Notting Hill, that they had the shebeens there and all this kind of stuff. A lot of the people that came over with the Windrush moved to Notting Hill, basically because they had no other choice but to go to Notting Hill, because at the time, so we're told, there was a lot of the racism wasn't hidden. It was like in your face. It was the people coming over from the Windrush, looking for digs, knocking on doors, and it was no blacks, no dogs, no Irish, and all this kind of. They had to. So because of this, they ended up in some of the scummiest, accommodation. Not because they were scummy or not because they didn't have the money, basically, but because that's the only people that would allow them into their homes to rent them flats or apartments were people in rundown areas, and Notting Hill was quite run down at the time. It's not like it was gentrified.
Sorry, the building of the communities there, it was a lot of the Indians that were already there, a lot of the Chinese people that were already in London. Yeah, it was a majority of those people that actually opened the doors to the people from the
Oh, right, okay.
It was virtually like the American segregation in a way, because it kind of ran on a par that with the stuff that was happening on in the States at the time. So I know from the experience and from the stuff that, well, not my experience, but the stuff from my father's experience, is that really did go on. It was that, you know, they tried, you know, my dad was saying on a number of occasions that the amount of times that they tried to get bigger holes, because it was growing. More and more people came over from the Windrush era, and the people that was already there was interested. But the venues just weren't big enough. These church halls weren't big enough to fill these people. So they would go and even go to other churches that had bigger halls, or go to big hall places, and they were flatly refused.
Yeah.
You know, that you know, this is the stuff that I remember from being a kid growing up. My dad telling us all this, you know, while he was playing his slate records and telling us of the history and of how he came to London and the music scene, you know. Yeah. That's how I got to music myself and my older brothers.
Yeah. So well, the thing with Notting Hill is that actually it was in terms of the London counterculture. If you look at where a lot of the key events of the London counterculture, and when I'm talking London counterculture, I'm talking predominantly psychedelic era, the so-called hippie era. So we're talking 67, 68, 69. A lot of the key events and a lot of the key venues and a lot of the key people were actually based in Notting Hill. There was the Free School, which was the London Free School, and I've been researching a lot into the London Free School over the years, and it's just one of these wishy-washy, acid-happy kind of. I really still don't know what it was about, because depending on the person you ask who set up this free school, they've all got a different take on what it is. But basically, in a nutshell, the London Free School was based in Notting Hill. It was a place, which is all very hippie, all very LSD. It was a place where immigrants, not necessarily blacks, it could be Greeks or Italians or Spanish, or my parents were Greek, Cypriot, came over. It was a place for immigrants to come over, go to learn to read maybe, it's an integrating school. So if you're a little bit nervous about certain aspects of British society, you could go there and you could learn about how to open a bank account, how to read English, about English history, this kind of thing. It was about empowering people. That's one version I've got. But then there's another version which says it was actually like a den of vice. You know, there was like underage kids going in there and God knows what was going on. There was like LSD all over the place being handed out. It was partly run by Michael de Freitas, who came from Trinidad, who was a pimp drug dealer. And he also, Michael X, he modelled himself on Malcolm X, as he modelled himself as like the British version of Malcolm X. He was like a bit shady, dealing in drug deals and pimping and stuff. And this was going on in this free house as well. Really, really dodgy stuff going on. But the way that they were raising money for this free school, which also had influences from the London School of Economics, which is part of the Fabian Society. So we've got this social engineering connection going on there. So to raise money for this free school, which didn't last very long, it only lasted about a year, they got Pink Floyd to play benefit gigs in Notting Hill, in church halls and stuff. This was before they were famous. This was when Pink Floyd were like the darlings of the London counterculture. They were like the band. If you think in America, you'd say it was the Grateful Dead, who were the band of the burgeoning hippie thing. You'd go to a Grateful Dead gig and more often than not, there'd be someone there handing out free acid. So it was a place of social engineering, someone might say. But in Britain, the British version of that was Pink Floyd, and they were doing these benefit gigs in All Saints Hall, I think it was called, and various other places to raise money for this free school, which was basically, some people say it was a school, other people say there was like some really, really dodgy stuff going on there, underage kids and sex and acid and brothels and all sorts of stuff. this is what was going on in London. This was going on right in Notting Hill. And then you've got the Notting Hill Carnival as well, which was started by Michael X, this guy, this dealer pimp, which the procession started on Tavistock Square, which is interesting.
Exactly. Yeah, there's major connections there, isn't there?
Yeah. So, yeah, in terms of Decca and say, I don't know, but I know that Notting Hill was huge influence on the 60s counterculture. Definitely.
I'll have to get you in touch with my dad. Sorry, I'll have to get you in touch with my dad. He's a great source of information, in particular those days that he was down in London. So I'll have to put you in touch with him, because the stories that we were told growing up, you know, I remember that, you know, I remember him telling us, and looking at the music scene now, I can kind of see what my dad was saying.
Yeah, I think the punk thing was quite important to the punk thing. I haven't looked too much into that, but I know that Notting Hill was very important to the punk movement. I know a couple of bands that came out around that time wrote songs about Notting Hill and stuff like that, what was going on. And
I mean,
it's amazing
the Wood Green area, Chancery Lane, all that area, massive international community. Yeah, but obviously, you know, it was with all the things that was going on there, like you said. I mean, it was the Epstein Island of its time.
Yeah.
You know,
the thing with the Notting Hill Carnival was it's just got this weird thing going on around it. I mean, it was actually an indoor carnival, wasn't it? Before, I think 1966 or 67 was the actual, what we call now the Notting Hill Carnival actually started 66 or 67. But before then, it had been indoor. I think they'd done them in a few church halls or something.
Well, it's quite similar. Like I know from like the Leeds Carnival. If you ever go, if anybody has a chance to go, I'm sure Super Leeds is in there. If he's been to the Leeds Carnival, if you ever go there at any time, obviously they have it in the main park in the area there, but you walk past everybody's houses, these old Victorian houses, and everybody's got parties on. They've got the sound systems outside, playing the music, the food, the red stripe, and everything. Pretty much the same, you know, with London pre-Notting Hill Carnival. As I was saying before, it was very hard for people to find a venue where large amounts of people could congregate. So you had the individual houses, you know, and they were all playing different music, different foods, and everything else. So it just got that big. Is that then obviously, as you say, Mike X, which is another person. It's a name actually I've not heard for a long time. Organising.
Go take a look at the Occult Beatles. You'll find there's a couple of articles I've written about Michael actually, because he got hung for murder in Trinidad in '75. He was deeply connected to John Lennon as well. John Lennon funded him. It's all. He broke bail. He was actually Michael X was in Britain. He broke bail, and John went back to Trinidad. And it said that John Lennon had actually paid the bail money. So then you got to say, well, if he paid the bail money, did he know that his mate was gonna jump? You know, huge story. That would need like a 4-hour, you know, program or whatever. But the Notting Hill thing, the carnival, you know, there's a couple of quotes I've come across from people who were there at the time, and they do credit Michael X with being one of the central figures for starting this. Again, you don't see his name mentioned. When you see anniversaries about the Notting Hill Carnival, you do not see the name Michael de Freitas, aka Michael X. You don't see it anywhere. The only place you see it is from the people that are actually there who are reliving those memories.
He'll never have a blue plaque. He'll never have a blue plaque.
No, there is a blue plaque on Tavistock.
Yeah, well, there you go.
There you go. And it's got Rowan Laslett, who was a lady who gets credited for it. And she actually lived on Tavistock Crescent or Tavistock Road. I can't remember which Tavistock it was. But she lived in Notting Hill on one of the Tavistock roads. So she's got that kind of connection going on. But according to some people who were there at the time, they said that when they were talking about putting this together, this outside procession, there were a couple of complaints from people saying there's a couple of people that have come to take part in this Notting Hill thing, this carnival thing, who've come with the mindset of London School of Economics and the Fabian Society. They've got this thing in their brain where they want that philosophy to be put into the carnival. So it's quite apt, if you like, that the procession Why did they start the procession? Is it just coincidence? But why did they start the procession at Tavistock Crescent? I think it was Tavistock Square or Tavistock Crescent. Square. That's where they started it, and I think that's where the blue plaque is. So when you've got all these elements, London School of Economics, Fabian Society, Tavistock, these are all the names that always come up when you talk about the counterculture in the 60s. These are always the social engineers that keep getting mentioned. And you've got them here again with the Notting Hill Carnival. Yeah, but it's never been mentioned.
Enjoy themselves in the job.
I mean, when you talk about the counterculture in the 60s, I mean, the Beatles were a big part of that. People are asking about the Beatles. People are asking about whether you think John Lennon was a decent enough guy. Someone else did put something else, another question about the Beatles in there. The Beatles in the 60s, I mean, they were a huge part of this counterculture. And how far do you think they were used, and how far do you think that they knew they were being used? And that's what we had. We had somebody else asked a question about, you know, when you to a record's going backwards and it says Paul is dead.
Paul is a dead man, missing.
That sort of thing, yeah. So that was the other question. But yeah, what about the Beatles? I mean, they were massive, weren't they?
Well, they were massive. And we talked about, if anyone wants to find out do you remember the last time I was on here, I talked about how the avant-garde, the modern art movement, that must be up on YouTube somewhere if anyone wants to go take a look at that. But I looked basically at how the avant-garde movement, the modern art of music, was essentially the foundation of the 60s counterculture, both here and in the US. It was like it rarely started to get mentioned a bit now, and it makes me wonder whether people are actually listening to what I'm doing. So I do feel like quotes have been lifted out of my articles. But anyway, maybe it's just me being paranoid. But I have noticed that the mainstream have started to pick up on this, but the avant-garde was very, very, very much an underpinning of whatever was going on, even more than the LSD and everything that became part of it as well. But someone who was really pushing for the avant-garde was Paul McCartney, essentially. And when you look at the avant-garde and you look at the history, when you go back to just after the Second World War, the Allied forces moved into Germany and they called it denazification. They got rid of all the radio stations, they closed them all down, they shut down the theatres, they shut down anything that had anything to do with entertainment. And they reintroduced it again, but under their terms, under the US and the UK's terms, mainly the US. And what was happening around Germany at that time was the CIA and the military were secretly funding avant-garde, modern art, if you like, musicians to, you know what avant-garde music is? It's basically a tonal music in a sort of cut down, roundabout way. It's music with no melody. It's music with no kind of tune to it. So it could be me just going, pressing a button with a sound effect on it. That's it.
Laurie Anderson?
Yeah, she's into that. Yeah, Superman.
And her early stuff as well, particularly the 60s stuff.
Which is even more. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I mentioned this on the last Raconteurs news. There's so many, but examples I could give of what avant-garde music is. But there's one where it's a piece. I can't remember which artist it was, whether it was John Cage or Stockhausen. I can't remember. One of the others, maybe Berriot. What they did was they went up on in a helicopter with a microphone, and it's live. This is a live music piece, and they just put a microphone up to the propellers and amplify the propellers. That's it. That's the music. Okay, so this is what the CIA was. I mean, out of tune pianos. I mean, that's another thing with the avant-garde. It's all people playing the piano but playing the keys that would term as that you would deem as to be tuneful or pleasant or melodious. They would be going dong 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 dong, all that kind of stuff. CIA was paying for all this in the 50s, certainly in the late 40s and the 50s. This movement, what came with this movement was avant-garde in everything, avant-garde in poetry, avant-garde in acting, avant-garde in art, film, theatre. It doesn't matter what it was. There was a general umbrella of this, and the CIA was paying for all this. And then right slap bang in the middle of it all, Paul McCartney gets taken in by these guys that are really into this kind of stuff. One of them was Barry Miles. He was a bookshop seller, and he opened a bookshop. And part of this bookshop had an art gallery in it as well. And what they did was they basically pushed the avant-garde, and their ambition basically was to make avant-garde mainstream. Also part of that business was Peter Asher of Peter and Gordon, who had a hit in the 60s with A World Without Love. Just turns out that his sister was Jane Asher, who Paul McCartney was going out with at the time. So he was another partner in this business, and the other partner was Fraser, Alan Fraser. I can't remember his name. Robert Fraser, I think his name was. Is it Robert Fraser? No, I don't think it was Robert Fraser. His name's escaped me for now. Dunbar, John Dunbar, that's it, who was, at the time, he was Marianne Faithfull's husband, and then she left him for Mick Jagger. And so they had this shop together. It was an art gallery and a bookshop, but this bookshop also sold records, avant-garde records. It sold pieces by Aleister Crowley, by Kenneth Anger, by various quote-unquote Satanists. And Paul McCartney became friends through going out with Peter Asher, his sister, with Jane Asher. Through knowing her and knowing the brother, he got to meet Barry Miles, and he got to meet Dunbar as well. And he got to find out about the shop. And they drew him into that. He helped finance the shop, helped to open it. He actually even went to the shop itself before it opened, and painted and cut bits of wood and built stuff, shelves and what have you. So he was giving it a lot of support, and he wasn't only giving it support in terms of money, but he was also giving it support in terms of going out in public. And for the Beatles back then to be doing that, that's huge. That's absolutely huge. And it just turns out that at the same time that this was going on, the avant-garde was getting connected into the counterculture along with the LSD. I mean, it's a long story. You really have to go and, if you go and take a look at previous Raconteurs news, I did. That goes really into it. Again, not even though I go on for ages, it still doesn't get to the bottom of it. I really do have to get this some kind of massive article piece. But yeah, if you want to go and find out the roots of that and more about it, and why the avant-garde and the CIA is important to the counterculture, and why I think it's perhaps some part of British version of Laurel Canyon, you need to go and take a look at that.
It's it is on YouTube. I can tell you that. It's I found it today myself. So
yeah, I can't remember what number broadcast.
It don't matter. Just Matt Conspiro. Type it in on YouTube. You'll find it. It'll be on this one, or it'll be this one, or it'll be that one.
But whether Paul McCartney or any other or the other Beatles were willing, I don't know. I really, that's like the $1 million question, isn't it? I get that asked. Out of all the questions I get asked, that's one of the most common ones. Did they know what they were doing? Did they know that this? Did they really know? Did they really have to know? Is the thing. I mean, whether they knew or not, did they really have to agree to it or not? The fact is that Paul McCartney certainly got into this, because after what the avant-garde did for him personally was to influence him in the Beatles going psychedelic, the Sgt. Pepper album, Tomorrow Never Knows, the track with all the samples on it, the creepy sounding track. I love it, actually. I do actually love that track, but it is a bit creepy sounding. And it's based on the book, Timothy Leary's book, The Tibetan Book of the Dead, what he based it on, the tripping under a controlled situation. So that was where it says, close your mind, relax and float downstream is one of the lyrics in that song. That's taken directly from a Timothy Leary book about tripping on acid, which John Lennon had actually bought at that shop that these three guys owned, that McCartney introduced Lennon to. So Sgt. Pepper, Magical Mystery Tour, the film, the music, I Am the Walrus, A Day in the Life, all that stuff that sounds freaky and would have sounded really freaky back then, was as a result of being with these guys, these avant-garde guys. And all this stuff just went hand in hand with the acid and the Summer of Love. I mean, you could say that the Sgt. Pepper album was basically what historians tell us now. Whether it's true or not, I don't know, but I never lived through it. But they tell us it was the soundtrack of the hippie era of the second Summer of Love, of the Summer of Love of 1967. So yeah, so it all ties in. So the next question is, was it a conspiracy? And if it was, how? You know, but there's a lot of connections.
Again, the things we've been through in the
last one,
in the last show. So if he can find, I did a little typing today because I'm going to look to see if there's any other interviews that you've done that were on YouTube. You know, while I was cooking my tea, and the only thing I found was our previous interview. So you'll be able to find that. No problem at all.
I've forgotten what the question was actually. There was actually another question.
I'm just, what I was going to ask is, Owen, you look like a catalogue model sat on a stool.
Because before the beginning of the show, Jason, as you know, I took a cushion off my seat so I would not be up there somewhere.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, this seat's rather uncomfortable without the cushion, so I'm just sitting comfortably. That's
okay.
All. Don't worry, I'm not on the powers.
As long as you're sitting comfortably.
I want to ask a question that's come from the chat room from Mahat Malevolence. It says, Matt, got any thoughts on the involvement on Situationist International?
No, it's something that I need to look into deep, but it does look dodgy. I know that I think Malcolm McLaren comes from that kind of thing. It wasn't it the Situationists who in the 60s they were part of some quote unquote terrorist attacks that took place in London, sort of on the tail end of the 60s. As the counterculture, the hippie thing was tailing off, you had these King Mob, I think one of them was called. I think the other one was called the Angry Brigade. And what they did, I think one of them, there were bombings and all kinds of things going on against the man, against the establishment. I can't remember the exact details. It's something I really do need to look into. But it's something that began in the counterculture, this King Mob and the Angry Brigade, but it really kind of picked up the pace in the later 60s and into the early 70s. Funnily enough, Malcolm McLaren was part of that scene because he wasn't really a hippie. And the Angry Brigade and the King Mob lot weren't really hippies. They were part of that counterculture. But as you know, that counterculture in London was a mixing pot. There was all kinds of people just mixing. It got to the point in the later 60s where everyone was kind of looking for the same thing almost, like protesting against the Vietnam War or whatever it was. And they had this common ground, although they might have had different interests and different ways that they wanted to explore things. They might have had different specialities. When there was a few issues that brought them all together in this countercultural bubble, if you like. And King Mob and the Angry Brigade were part of that. They certainly weren't hippies, but they were part of that. They were in that malaise, if you like. And yeah, Malcolm McLaren was a part of those. One of those. I can't remember which one, but he was a part of those as well. And there was a documentary quite recently about Malcolm McLaren's early years, where they actually talked to some of these people that were part of that, and they talk about Malcolm in it. I think it came out after he died, so it don't get a lot of contributions from him as such. But yeah, that's the Situationist thing is interesting. I think, wasn't it also Pete Townsend? I think he did mention once or twice that the smashing of the guitar that he does was part of the Situationist thing. It was a situation.
Very symbolic towards those people, wasn't it? They knew.
Destroy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And he learned at the Slade School of Art, I think it was, which a lot of music artists went to. And there was an art teacher there that was a bit not conventional, and he was the one that kind of inspired a lot of the people that then later went on and formed bands. And I think that's where Pete Townsend got the smash. He changes the story. Sometimes he says, "Oh, the reason I smashed the guitar is it's just a random thing I did one night, and I smashed it, and everyone in the audience liked it, so I thought I'd do it again." But in other interviews, he talks about situationism and actually using the smashing of the guitar as that idea. That's what it's all about, the kicking the drums and everything, destruction.
Makes sense. It makes sense now, because obviously when you're growing up and you're watching these pop videos or pop performances, my always thought is that they was angry with the sound man or something like that, so they kick the instruments over or whatever. They've been cut short early of the full set.
They were losing money. They were losing money doing that. That's the story. That every time they smashed a bit of equipment, that was another notch on the bill that they couldn't afford to pay, because they started doing this when they were still relatively unknown. So they didn't actually have the money to pay to keep smashing brand new guitars up. Or so they say. Who knows? Maybe someone was paying for all this stuff, because if you're in a band where there's 4 or 5 of you and you're splitting the money and you still haven't yet made it big time, how are you going to make a living? And you've got 2 managers as well. They had 2 managers, didn't they? Kit Lambert, I can't remember the other guy's name. So they've got all these overheads and they're smashing guitars every night. Yeah. Where's the money coming from to keep doing this? Buying new, Rickenbackers or whatever every day, and new drum kits. They don't come cheap.
Have you read Pete Townshend's book on child abuse?
Wow.
No, I've heard about it.
No, neither have I, because it doesn't exist. But that's what he got away with, didn't he? He got child abuse images on his.
Yeah, he said he was researching it for a book. Yeah, he was researching it for a book. Yeah, was it might have been an album. It did kind of pop up in Tommy, didn't it? Uncle Ernie Fiddle About.
Right, I get it. Yeah.
But I thought he'd written that book, hasn't he?
No,
that was his story, wasn't it? That he was writing a book, researching about paedophilia, and that's why he paid credit card details to get.
I think it was part of Operation O, weren't it?
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah.
So he must have been sacrificed, because there were a few that were protected from that, including a certain Mandelson bloke, Peter Mandelson,
and a Linton, wasn't it? Wasn't there a Linton?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anthony Linton, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing how it's all connected. It's all entwined. It's all.
You look at Bill Wyman. Why doesn't anyone say what a filthy pervert Bill Wyman is?
Yeah.
How old was she when he married her? She was 16. She was barely turned legal, but he'd been going out with her for 2-3 years before. He says, "Oh, it's okay though, because I wasn't touching her. There was no sex." It doesn't matter if there was or wasn't. I mean, the guy's he was in his late 40s, early 40s or something, and he's why would you go out with a girl who's 13, 14 years old?
She was 13 when she first went out with him. Mandy Smith.
Mandy Smith? Her name, wasn't it? Mandy Smith.
Yeah, Mandy Smith. Yeah, she was 13, I think, when she first went out with him. But there's a lot of them. I mean, Mike Reed, he also took his wife out when she was 13, I think, on their first date. And the mum and dad was stood waiting at the door to send her away on a date with this Mike Reed from Radio 1.
And was it the guy from Aerosmith?
Steve Tyler.
I can't remember the exact details, but if you look at Tyler, he was involved with someone who was very young as well, and it got really deep with that one. In terms of the relationship, it wasn't just some fleeting thing. Not to say that because it's fleeting, it's inexcusable. But the fact is he got really. He can't say, oh, it was a mistake, because it went on. It was pretty involved. David Bowie is another one. Why aren't people saying anything about this stuff?
Just because they wanted to make it the normal, didn't they? They wanted to make it normal.
Director?
Roman Polanski.
Roman Polanski. See, he still makes films. He's still revered around the world. It's proven.
It's one rule for one person and another rule for another.
Exactly.
Right, I'm not sticking up for people like Dave Lee Travis from Radio 1 or what have you, but the things that he did compared to what these other guys have done. So why is he getting punished and not them? I'm not saying that he shouldn't be brought to book, but if you're going to bring him to book, why don't you bring all these other people to book? These other cases aren't even alleged. They are real and true, and they happened. But somehow we have to do all hail the legends, all hail the music legends. Oh, you are a god. Oh, I am not worthy to kiss your boots. All right, they've made great music, but in terms of being people, well, Jerry Lewis, there's another one, Jerry Lee Lewis from the 1950s. He got caught. He got caught. I think he got arrested, didn't he? He got put away.
He married his cousin when she was 13.
Yeah.
Chuck
And there
Berry.
was Chuck Berry.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, exactly.
Over state lines, he drove over state lines so he could, get around the laws or something. It just goes on and on and on. And these people are regarded like, yeah, Chuck Berry, yes, I love his music, and he was a pioneer. He probably is the king of rock and roll in terms of making it happen. But, privately, these guys have got baggage, to put it mildly,
Yeah. A couple of things. Firstly, we had a guy on who a couple of weeks ago, I can't remember, I think it was this guy, I think it was Dick Kahn. And I think we started talking about Mandela effect somehow. But he talked about Bill Haley and the Comets. And I noticed in your article you wrote Bill Haley and the Comets. But you had an actual picture of that, of the records. And
the Decca record sleeve, yeah. Where it said Bill Haley and his Comets.
His Comets, yeah.
So, I always grew up thinking it was Bill Haley and the Comets. Maybe they changed it afterwards while we were growing up in the 70s and 80s. Maybe they changed it to the Comets. But yeah, in those days, it was his Comets. Yeah, and that was recorded in a Masonic building. If you go take a look at the article, you'll see the actual building. It's in New York. That's where Decca was based. It's New York offices, it's recording studios. I think it was actually the recording studio was based in this building in New York, which was owned by the fraternity of the Pythian Order, which Louis Armstrong was a member of. But yeah, it was, I can't remember when the order bought that building, but sometime around kind of like the 1930s or 40s, they were having a few troubles paying for the place because it's this huge building. So what they did was they started hiring it out. This is the story, that they were hiring out, and the ballroom of this hotel, the auditorium, they gave to Decca Records as a recording studio. Buddy Holly and the Crickets recorded there in this Masonic room, and also, Bill Haley and the Comets, Rock Around the Clock, which is the song which basically is, regarded by a lot of historians as the starting point of what was the rock and roll craze, and from the rock and roll craze you get the 60s and then the countercultures and everything that came after it, punk and on we go. So it's interesting to think that song which kicked this whole thing off was actually recorded in a Masonic lodge.
Yeah, in under dubious circumstances as well, if the Mandela effect's got out to do with it, which I doubt very much, but I think we have perceptions of it, but never mind about that. What other parts of entertainment do you look at? Have you been looking at? And because it says on your blog that you know the entertainment industry. I mean, where are you seeing it? Are you looking at simply like X Factor shit like that and see?
Not anymore. No, I did look at Simon Cowell.
It's too easy, isn't it? It's too easy. It's there every week. You'd be doing an article every week.
Yeah, that's the problem. That's as I was saying earlier, I'll be doing an article every week, and because I'm not a slow worker, but I'm very thorough, and I don't like to just put any old stuff out there. I cross-check it, and I even put the reference links. Every time I write an article or publish an article, you will always find the links at the bottom so people can check it out for themselves to make sure, that I'm getting my facts as straight as I can possibly do, which isn't always easy because you're working in a kind of a research area where a lot of the facts don't like to be shown. So I mean, that's the problem. I haven't got the time to be, keeping up to speed with all these things that keep happening in the pop world at the moment. Like, you've got Simon Cowell, you've got Nicki Minaj, we've mentioned Miley Virus, and all the others, Katy Perry. It's just every day there's something going on. Every day, I can't keep up with it. And like I say, I'm not really interested in it at all. So I would rather go off and look at this other stuff, which no one else really is looking at as well. There's a lot of stuff there that you don't really, you know, it's conspiratorial, but it's actually there in front of you, and you can find it quite easily. You know, it's actually there. It's just that it's never been talked about, especially with the counterculture of the 60s. It's all America. That's all you get to hear about. You don't hear about London. You don't hear about what happened in Britain, which is really, really bad, because, like I said before, a lot of what the Americans picked up in and used for their Summer of Love in 67, 66 in California at Haight-Ashbury and what have you, comes from Britain. The word psychedelic was Dr. Humphrey Osmond, who I think was Scottish. I think he's a British doctor. He termed that word. And again, it was Michael Hollingshead, who was born in Britain, who introduced Timothy Leary to LSD and blew his mind, literally. And various other bits and pieces, like the Beatles, the most popular band in the world. And through them getting into the avant-garde scene, thanks to these guys in this shop in London, which was based in Mason's Yard, they got into avant-garde and helped to popularise that way of thinking, and introduced songs like Tomorrow Never Knows in 1966 on the cusp of this new counterculture that really flowered in 1967. And lo and behold, they were ready for it, because they brought us the soundtrack of it, Sergeant Pepper's, which was a soundtrack not just for Britain, but for America. They were the biggest band in the world, and they were the biggest flag wave bearers of this avant-gardism, of this counterculturalism. Like Barry Miles, I can't remember the quote, but Barry Miles came out with a quote talking about the Beatles were the most commercial and most powerful commercial band in the world, and they were pushing the avant-garde. So you've got a pop band with massive worldwide appeal, pushing something that is so obscure and making it mainstream, introducing it into the counterculture through the art, through Yoko Ono was from the avant-garde. She came from...
Oh, yeah, God, oh, Jesus Christ.
all that screaming and stuff. Avant-garde. Yeah, she calls it singing, but she's the only one who does. You know, and that's avant-garde. That is, you know, that... God, please, woman, shut up. There's a brilliant quote. Have you seen? There's a documentary they did about the bed-ins. You know, the John Lennon bed-ins that they did in 1969, where they sat in bed to get peace, and they called it hair peace, bed peace. And they were inviting all these reporters to sit with them in the room around the bed and to talk about peace, to get statements that they could use on the news and on the radio and the TV. And lots of celebrities were coming in to chat with them as well, to talk peace with John and Yoko. And there was this American guy who was real arrogant shit, but he said one really funny thing. He looked at John. He was talking to John Lennon, and Yoko Ono, sitting in the bed, kept interrupting him. So basically, what this guy said was to John. He said, "I'm not surprised you want peace living with this." That says it, you know. Give peace a chance. I'm not surprised living with her. Yeah.
It's I mean, we've got it in all aspects of entertainment and media these days, aren't we? I know we started off with this, but we just go back to how easy it is to condition, to train people, how easy it is to get something into somebody's head, and how that is used to great effect. Like just them, the NHS, whatever. What would it? Save the NHS. That was the logo. They had that logo. It was save lives, save the NHS, stay home, or whatever it is. Then they dropped the save the NHS.
Yeah, whatever it was. Yeah.
But they dropped the NHS one, and it's then quick. As soon as it started, all the standing on the doorstep and clapping had stopped.
Yeah.
You know, just this, you know, all these things that it's so easy to get people into.
Into obeying what you're telling them to do. Because there's no one there watching them. There's no one standing outside their front door paid by the UK government to come and stand at the door to make sure they come out. So they don't have to come out. You know, and hey, you know, maybe someone who does bang the pot every Thursday would think, no, fuck you, I want to carry on doing it and go out and bang the pot every Thursday, but they don't because they've been told not to, and they actually don't do it. So it's what the thing is, I heard it down my street, and I just don't understand the concept of it, right? Because you're banging a pot. Where I live, we're about 5, 6, 7 miles away from the nearest hospital. How on earth is that person going to hear in the hospital that person banging a pan outside my house? It's absolutely ridiculous. It's like talking to yourself. That's what you're doing. You're talking to yourself.
Well, I certainly didn't join in with the pot banging. I just sat at home and smoked my pot. That's what I did.
Yeah.
Well, I have my every other day. I have my bandage done. So a district nurse comes to my house and does my dressing, which now
this is saucy.
Oh,
yeah. Ooh, I can see right up your skirt. Yeah, but even though it's just
tourniquet. Sorry.
So I'm having my dressing done every other day, and I mean they're all saying it's mad, it's insanity, and you've got this girl today, and she's got glasses on, and she's got this mask on, and then she's got this windscreen thing in front of her. Not today. No, yeah, were today, yeah. So I had my I&R done today, and I thought to myself, well, she's not catching out, is she? I can sit here and stink like a pig. It don't matter. I can fart and do whatever I want, and she's not gonna know because she's behind the thing, and then her glasses all get steamed up, and she's got to take them off, which means then she's got to do something with them, and they might have viruses on them, and it's just one of an I&R nurse came, and I said to her, because I was sat on settee, and she's getting the I&R thing ready, the reader, and it's like a blood sugar reader, but it's a bit bigger and it takes a little bit longer. Yeah. So she shoves the thing in, and I'll wait. And I said, sit down, sit in my wheelchair. And she says, oh no, we're not allowed to sit down.
Why? What if you bend your knees, you spread?
I don't get it.
You spread COVID.
I know.
That's another thing. Everyone calls it COVID now. When this first kicked off, it was Corona this, Corona that. But they've managed to. Oh, maybe it's just where I live. They've managed to condition people into saying COVID. Now everyone says COVID. Yeah. No one says Corona anymore. This is how easy it is to direct people's minds.
That's the whole stupidness of it. I mean, even here in Portugal, I was out in the Knights Templar town of Tamar, and we'd stopped at a bar on his way there, and we were sat outside having a drink. Sorry, you guys in the UK because your pub's not open. Not until my birthday, which is July the 4th, incidentally, the year of the summer of love, 1967. But anyway, as we were sat there having a drink, there was obviously there was an elderly complex behind this bar and everything else. But a van pulled up, which was obviously the thing said obviously they were carers. But these two ladies got out in the paper hazmats, and they had the masks on, and they had even the shoe covers, the plastic thing. Oh, yeah. But they walked out of the van, across the road, around the corner, and then into the building. And just that alone, you're carrying whatever you walked on, you're carrying. And the whole thing just seems nonsensical. The whole, I refuse now to wear a mask and use the hand sanitizer, because people are still transferring germs when in the supermarket they're taking things off the shelf and then back. So what's the point of putting any sort of hand sanitizer on when other people you don't know which other items people have touched? It's really, really over the top.
It's people are going through the motions. A lot of shops are going through the motions. A lot of stores are going through the motions. Some aren't. You can guess some of them you feel are pushing the agenda, but other stores are just going through the motions. Like Sainsbury's in the UK seems to be going through the motions. No one's wearing masks. They're doing what they're told to do or suggested to do. They've got tapered off areas so you can only walk one way, and they've got the stickers on the floor and all this kind of stuff. But none of the staff are wearing masks or gloves or visors. They're not handling things with gloves. They're not taking stock off the shelves. And so it's like they're just going through the motions. But then again, there are other businesses where you can feel that they are part of the agenda. They've obviously gone to the Bilderberg meeting and they know what they've got to do. They're going to push it. But I mean, how many stories, man, you could tell about the lunacy, the catalogue of crap that is going on at the minute, you know, just to go and buy a loaf of bread or go to the bank, and people aren't shouting, you know, like I said earlier, no one is complaining. They're just standing in the queue and taking it. What do you have to do to make these people get bloody angry? I mean, for God's sake.
Well, I think the rules that they're going to get for the pub opening, I think if that doesn't break the back, I don't know what will. Because as I was saying to you know, we was talking about it earlier on, that the pubs have always been a social community place where people would meet and talk about the lives and everything that's gone on. And with the alleged new rules coming out, that is a massive kick in the teeth.
Yeah.
You know, in the UK, certainly, you know, that there's still, oh yes, we'll open the pubs, but there's these restrictions first.
Yeah.
So more and more people are going to be, well, even when the COVID started, you had a lot of people that were building their own, you know, pubs in the back garden, in the garden shed, and converting them. More and more people will turn to that because it's the only chance that they will have to have the people around that they want to be around, that are not wearing masks and they're not social distancing and enjoying life.
Yeah.
You know?
Come on. You're on a night out with your mates, right? You've had a few pints, you've been to a few boozers, and you're on your way, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to stand 2 meters behind on a spot.
Chance.
Behind somebody else who stood at bar. You're going to be stood at the side of the bar trying to get the bartender's attention like you've always done, which has always been really close together. You're squeezing between two people. You've got your money and
the heat, the condensation. Has anyone thought about the condensation when you go, being ex-club DJs, you, me, Jason, you and me, you know, when it gets busy in a club, well, you know, from going out, Owen, when you go out to a club or a bar, when it gets really, really packed, there's condensation dripping off the walls, you know. So you're telling me that's not going to spread COVID? You know.
Yeah, I did my stint at DJing as well. I've done that. I've been a karaoke presenter as well. So I know exactly what you're on about. You know, if you've got a room that's packed full of people, you know, if it's chock-a-block, you can, you know, you get the staff rushing over halfway through, climbing over tables to open windows because of the heat that's in there.
Yeah.
You know, the germs are there, aren't they?
Well, no one's talked about that element of it. I mean, yeah, it hasn't been thought out. I don't know what to think. I honestly don't know what to think because every day something new happens. I don't know what to think. Obviously, it's a scam, obviously, but the level of the scam and where it's going and what they've got planned, I don't know, and I'm not even going to try and.
Well, as a bloke sat here with one leg, and the only reason I've got another leg is because I've got something in there that's probably going to kill me in 2 to 5 years. I'm just sat here laughing my fucking arse off at these fucking idiots, these people, I mean, what is wrong with you? I know we're British and we always queue, we form an orderly queue, you know, in post office and that, but that's just politeness. This is not politeness. But the crazy thing about it, which is what I've said before, is you don't know the person that's 2 meters in front of you. You don't know whether they're shitting themselves and are going to be afraid of anybody coming anywhere near them. So you don't want to approach them.
That's right. That's how conditioning works. That's how it works. Yeah. That gets in your brain, and before you know it, it becomes a habit. Whereas, like you say, at first you're standing in the queue and you're thinking, "Oh, will that person mind if I move a little bit closer, or they move a little? Will they mind?" That suddenly, if you keep thinking like that, that becomes a state of mind. That becomes a habit, and then that's how you get social conditioning. That's how you do it. Do it slowly, and just pushing the borders at the minute. That's what I feel. They're pushing it as far as they can see how far they can take it, and they must be laughing their heads off. They must be laughing their heads off, thinking, never would we have thought it would have been this easy to control so many millions of people. Even people who don't, I've spoken to people who don't buy it, but they still go through the rigmarole. They still go through the sketch. You know, they stand on the sticker, they put the mask on, and when you actually talk to them, they say to you, actually, you know, there's something a bit dodgy about this. It doesn't ring true. and then they go off and obey orders. You know, it's bizarre. Do you know, this weekend I think was going to be Glastonbury, wasn't it? The Glastonbury
Download Festival.
Download. When was Glastonbury?
Download Festival it was going to be.
I thought yeah, it's normal. I'm sure there's something on Facebook about some sort of Glastonbury event, whether it's an online event. I don't know, but I remember seeing something on Facebook about an event happening this weekend, and Glastonbury wasn't mentioned.
Download
Okay.
Festival.
Okay.
I've told you 3 times. What is wrong with you?
Because it's
I
not.
don't like rock. I don't like rock music.
Well, it's around this time that you get. It is June, end of June, middle of June. It's Glastonbury Festival. There is a reason I pick up on that, because it's topical, and it's something that I was reminded of today. Some old research that I've got that I've never really published, but I really need to go to the bog. So I need to go and have a wee. You don't mind? Because I'm moving about. I mean, you noticed I'm moving about like this. Really, I've just drank a litre of water.
I've got a question to ask you, Jason.
Leave your mic on.
I just run off and do what I have to do.
No
Leave your
problem.
mic on so we can hear you.
Give over. We'll see you in a bit.
Right.
Jason, question for you.
Yeah.
We were talking about the LGBTQI. Do you know what the QI stands for yet? You said you was going to try and find out what that was. You don't remember a couple of shows ago? I'm sure people in the chat room remember that. We were talking about
It's probably something to do with Stephen Fry. So it's like LBGT and then Stephen Fry's.
I get that. That's a good one.
I don't know. I mean, Stephen Fry, what does he describe him? Well, he's obviously a homosexual and he's fucking full of shit. And everyone thinks he's all really fucking intelligent because he reads a script and.
Well, he's just one of the Eatonites. He's one of the part of that club, isn't he? He's from, the
They're all saying. Just look at him. Russell Howard, Jewish, private school. What's his face? Him who does pub landlord. Yeah.
Oh,
Al Murray.
Al Murray, that's the one.
Yeah, boarding school.
Yeah.
Went to boarding school, right? So he's not doing that, on it's not being paid for by the People's Republic of Brent, is it? So
no, he's been primed, hasn't he? He's been primed and used, obviously. His character and everything else. I mean, you wouldn't see him out like that. I mean, obviously, when he does go out, people are going to see him in, how he dresses when he's on stage. Well, it is, isn't it? They're all actors. They are all actors.
Yeah, it is. It's all acting. It's all acting, mate. Honestly, a lot of it. I mean, we seem to have got this new generation of mediocre. They call themselves comedians, but they're nothing like comedians. Like Jack Whitehall. I mean, what the fuck? What's his name? Howard.
Russell Howard.
Russell Howard. What's his name? That one that's John. Oh God, what's he called now? John Richardson. Terrible. They were comedians.
There you go.
Yeah, that's funny as death.
Yeah. And then you've got that thing on Dave where they've got that big bloke as well. Him who headmaster on In Betweeners. That's the only thing he ever did that had any humour in it ever, because I've never seen ever since that he's ever been in that I've ever thought that were funny. And he's got they've all got the shows. It's all a little club. It's all a little club. They all went to boarding school together. They so he was my fag. So and so would have been so and so's fag. The old
that happened in the 60s as well. That happened in the 60s, and I've looked into. If you go take a look at my, at some point, a lot of this stuff will get edited and taken out from one particular article or another one and put onto Conspiro Media on my chronicles of the 60s counterculture. But at the moment, they're kind of spread out amongst a couple or 2 or 3 articles on my occult Beatles site on WordPress. If you go take a look at what was going on in Cambridge University back in the late 50s, early 60s, and who came out of that It was all Cambridge University crew. You know, you had like Beyond the Fringe, which was a comedy troupe, which was largely made up of people from Cambridge University. I can't remember which members were at Cambridge University. The majority of them, it was Peter Cook, it was Dudley Moore, it was Alan Bennett, who now is a playwright and stuff, and there was the other guy who was Jonathan Miller, who died quite recently. He was actually a doctor. He was a medical doctor before he went into comedy. And it's the Cambridge Footlights, basically. And what Beyond the Fringe did was they popularised what we now call political satire. They started out treading the boards across the UK, first through the Cambridge Footlights, through the university. Then they got taken to on shows and what have you. And then eventually the BBC gave them like shows and stuff to sort of like spread their wings, as it were. But if you look at a couple of the people from Beyond the Fringe, Emmanuel Miller, who is Jonathan Miller's father, was a Tavistock psychiatrist. He worked at Tavistock, and then suddenly killed himself in the late 60s, committed suicide. Jonathan Miller, as I say, was a trained medical doctor, and he was actually still training to become a medical doctor. He was in the last kind of few months of it before he was let out, as it were, to treat. So he was actually qualified by the time he sort of made it big in comedy. But at the time he was learning he was basically put out as a kind of a graduate doctor who's medical school. So he worked in hospitals, and he had a head doctor of the hospital who taught all these would-be doctors what they were going to come up with when they got a proper job in hospitals as doctors, medical doctors. That doctor who was teaching Jonathan Miller, Dr. Jonathan Miller, was none other than Peter Asher's dad. So you've got this connection of a doctor whose father worked at Tavistock, was a Tavistock psychiatrist, and I think he was also a pioneer of child psychology at the end of the war. So he's a Tavistock doctor whose son is being taught by the future would-be father-in-law of Paul McCartney's. Mm-hmm. And there's been allegations that have been put out in recent years that Peter Asher's father, whose name completely escapes me now, we'll just call him Dr. Asher, Jane Asher's and Peter Asher's father. There were allegations that came out from somebody who claimed he was a test subject in experiments that were taking place in London in the early part of the 60s, before the 60s counterculture really blew off and became big. And what these experiments were basically in tandem with the London police to see the effects of LSD, which at that point wasn't even really known about in the wider world. This is the early 60s to mid 60s. LSD still wasn't on the street, as it were. It was still within the military complex where it was being experimented on. The story is that Dr. Asher and Emmanuel Miller, who was Jonathan Miller's father, were involved in these experiments to see what the effects of LSD would be on young people and how they could use it to affect the mind, to basically take control of the mind. So if that allegation is true, basically it was a social engineering experiment that was taking place in the early 60s, as far as we know, between Jonathan Miller's father and also Paul McCartney's would-be father-in-law. Who would know, or well, that's the thing, isn't it? Who would know, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, that a few short years later, Jonathan Miller would become this huge star of the comedy scene with the BBC and bring in this new form of comedy, satire. And there's also Paul McCartney, who became famous with the Beatles. So from the Cambridge set, there's already one connection that you can find that's a little bit dubious. And also Pink Floyd's early manager, Peter Jenner, was Cambridge University as well, if I'm not mistaken. And he then later went to the London School of Economics, where he taught he was a lecturer at the London School of Economics. And the way he says it is, one day in the 1960s, he suddenly said to himself, I don't want to do this anymore. I've always wanted to get into music management. So I left my job and I discovered Pink Floyd and I became their manager.
Mm-hmm. There's a plaque in a bar in Cambridge of where they first met. I was at Cambridge. It sounds really good, that. But I was at King's College, Cambridge in 2006 with the Department of Work and Pensions on a summer school. And on a night out, we went into this pub, and it's got the legacy, and it's got this big write-up about how they met in this pub, and it's got the names on there. I wish, in fact, I've got the photograph somewhere of it. I'll post it up sometime. But yeah, there's a massive connection with Pink Floyd and Cambridge, as you say.
Yeah. They all came from there, didn't they? I think every single member came from Cambridge. Yeah.
It just blows your mind, Matt.
I mean, how is it that all these people... It just doesn't happen in real life. This is the thing. If anyone ever says to me, you're a bloody conspiracy theorist, this is all like, you're just like coming up with it off the top of your head. Well, I'm not coming up with it off the top of my head, because these are all facts. These are which have been spoken by the same people, apart from the mind control that I mentioned earlier about the experiments. But all the other stuff is fact, and B, where else in life do you get everybody coming into an industry where they all have come from the same place? Like the 1960s counterculture, how come they all come from bloody Cambridge University and London School of Economics and Tavistock and Notting Hill and the whole movement just from this one university? Come on, really? That's not how life works. You look at your social set, your mates, people you've worked with, they don't all come from the same bloody college. They come from all over the place, different walks of life. It just does not compute. I'm sorry. There is no such thing as a coincidence on this bloody level. No bloody way.
No, right. Well, anyway, we've done 2 hours. Webby's already took the piss out of me because I tried to end the show one time, and now he's probably do it again. Listen, Matt, it's been great. Just let everybody know where they can find you, where they can find your work, and that. I've posted the link a couple of times, and I'll do it again in the write-up as well. So just let everybody know where they can find you and connect with you. Just.
Well, there's Conspiro Media, the blog, which, as I said earlier, has been a bit dormant recently, but in the last few weeks I've started to put stuff on there. But as I say, the reason it's been dormant is because I haven't been doing the pop stuff, and I've been saving it. I've left it alive, that site, so basically people can go take a look at some of the archives that are there already, but that's where I'm going to be putting all the 60s mega articles that I'll be doing, which I haven't got to yet because I'm still researching it all. I've just got books and books and books of stuff that I'm reading, and documentaries and stuff. So it's a work in progress, but I think I can say for sure that in the next few months I'm going to start putting more stuff on that site. Where you'll find a lot of the activity is on the Conspiro Media Facebook page. So if you put Conspiro Media Facebook, you'll find that any posts that I put up in there are a collective of whatever I put up on the Occult Beatles site, which is a WordPress site. So any new articles that I post up on the Occult Beatles site will go on there, on the Facebook page. Also stuff that I've done on Conspiro Media will go on the Facebook page, plus stuff that doesn't go on either. So I'll just put little extra bits and pieces in, bits that I don't feel fit in with what I'm doing at the moment. I'll just add them in to the Facebook. So yeah, I mean, the Occult Beatles site is constant. That's updated quite regularly. But yeah, Conspiro Media Facebook or the Occult Beatles, and then see where that takes you. But the reason I mentioned Glastonbury, I'll quickly mention it. It was actually partly founded or formed, the Glastonbury Festival that we now know, by Winston Churchill's granddaughter, Arabella Churchill. And also a man by Andrew Kerr, who was an author who worked with Randolph Churchill, who was Winston Churchill's son, father of Arabella Churchill. He was an author who worked for Randolph Churchill, like his researcher. He was writing a biography on his father, and Randolph was writing a biography about his father, and Andrew was brought in to kind of help with the research. So it's a bit weird, isn't it, how you go from that to, with Arabella Churchill partly founding the Glastonbury Festival that we now know. Weird stuff. I could get more into that, but if you look on the Facebook page and go down a few, you'll find it. You'll find more details.
Listen, Matt, we will get you on again and get you onto that, because you have got so much information. 2 hours.
I just want to say, any questions that anyone's put down, I'll have a look at them and I'll try and answer some. If anyone wants to email me, I always get back to them. I don't ignore any. So if anyone's got any questions and stuff, you'll find the email links on my sites, where you can message me or whatever. So yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions I can. And I've loved it, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, Matt.
Listen, anytime, mate. Absolutely anytime. It's been an inspiration. I'm just trying to work out where Jimmy Cranky.
I met him.
Is that Jimmy Cranky on Sergiou? We're talking about.
This is the weirdest thing, man. When I was a kid, my parents had a restaurant, and because they were near the pier, and back in those days on the seaside, all like Jim Davidson, Cannonball, Paul Daniels, all that lot used to go and do shows there, and they'd come to my mum and dad's place and eat afterwards. And when I was a kid, wee nipper as it were, and my mum shouted up the stairs, "Matthew, the Crankies are here." Oh yeah, got my autograph book. Ran down the stairs. It was, oh my God. What's her name? The one who plays the kid, who's his wife? I saw her dressed in a dress. And up until that point, I'd always seen her dressed as a schoolboy. And I walked down the stairs, and I'm expecting to see her, and it was like this lady dressed in a dinner gown with makeup and earrings and the lot. That was a bit of a, I wasn't expecting that. What's happening? Little boy Cranky's gone in drag.
We'll end on the Crankies. We won't end on the Crankies. Uni Black Sister says, make sure you tune into his stream. I think he's doing some perhaps a little bit later on. So search Uni Black Sister. Also, I wanted to also let you know we're not doing anything else this week. I'm just giving more. I've given up a bit of time this week that I won't be doing this to spend for us family time. Me and my missus time. So we'll not be doing no. But Webby has got a show on the 25th, I believe, and it's I can't believe I'm plugging this. But anyway, Webby's got Mark Winders on the 25th. Is it 25th, 26th? Anyway, it's round about then. Anyway, look at it, the Webster Report. Yeah. So get yourself tuned into that, and we will be doing something next week on Monday and Tuesday. Last word to you, Owen, before we say bonjour.
Yep. Thank you very much. Yeah, well, I'm going to be spending the next couple of days working on a music track that I'm working with a guy in the UK, and also some more house hunting, which you'll know about in some time to come. But everything's going to be good. Thanks for having me back on again, Jason. I'll see you next week.
At 9 p.m, 25th of June, that's the Webster Report with Mark Winders. I can see right through him. He's going to have to be clean. Anyway, we'll from myself, Matt, and Owen, we'll see you again very soon. And thanks for listening. Give us a thumbs up and give Matt a thumbs up as well on his on Conspiro Media or Conspiro Media, whatever you want to call it. You say Conspiro, I can say Conspiro. Let's call the whole thing off.
Good night.
Good night.